have tried to shoot this video like 8 times. It has been that long since I've shot. This is obviously a new background. It's because I've moved. The move between actually moving and getting settled in this room was about a month and a half, which is why the only video that I've posted in the last couple of weeks is the old location. It's an older video. It's the one about the stories behind Disney princesses. We're going in a different direction. Well, maybe not too of a different direction. So, like I said, I moved. I had a sheet of paper and I had written down all of the ideas that I wanted to shoot, and I had it. I knew exactly where it was, but somehow it got lost in the move. So I had no idea what to do a video on. I wanted to shoot yesterday, but I couldn't find the list, so I had to come up with something. And I decided, I was like, let me put out my makeup and I'll figure out, maybe a look will scream to me or whatever. And it leaves a really nasty taste in my mouth to admit this, but one of the products that I'm using in this video is actually what made me think to do this video. Like, it's really just kind of, I feel dirty saying that, but here we are. This is actually a story that I will tell to anyone who listens, kind of like my Topsy video. Like, if you have the time and the patience to sit here and listen to me talk, I will tell you about these things so you know what actually happened. And a lot of people, when it comes to this story, have gotten kind of this gross glamorized version of it, and it's really horribly sad because I feel like when people think of the story, they think of the glamorized version of it, and they don't think about the fact that some really horrible things happened. And I want to talk about those. So here we are. So today, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to talk about the Limelight, the Club Kids, and Angel Melendez. If you know the story but you don't know Angel's name, you're getting the wrong story, the wrong version of the story. Let's put it that way. So I have my cheat sheet here because I didn't have time to write it and learn it. So I have my notes right here. I do have to say that I'm going to put a warning on this video. I'm going to be talking about some mature stuff. I'm going to be talking about drug use. I'm going to be talking about a description of a murder and its victim. And of course, my usual foul adult language complaining, because how the fuck did this happen? Not only how the fuck did this happen, but how did it happen and how did it turn into what it has turned into? It's mind-blowing to me. But the more stories I read like this, I'm like, you know what? People are just fucking terrible. People are fucking terrible. Not you, though. You're good. You're awesome. I love you. So there's a lot of factors that make this story so complicated. The main reason is just that there's so much going on, and it's one of those things, it almost makes me think of the game Until Dawn, where they have like the butterfly effect and, this one small thing, like, oh, you chose to not throw the rock at the bird, like affect somebody dying down the road. And I feel like this is kind of a ridiculous version of some sort of something like that. Normally for these videos, for my sources, I start on Wikipedia. And then I check out the citations. Oh, pardon me. And I check out the citations and I kind of hop between sources of information. This time, however, I actually had a bonus source, and it was a show that was on Investigation Discovery. It is a 10 episode series, and each episode is about a crime from the 90s. It's literally called the 1990s, the deadliest decade. And each episode is a crime that you may or may not have heard of. For example, I had heard of 3 of them, but not the rest of them. So it's an educational series. They talk to friends and family and cops and lawyers, anyone they can get their hands on. Newspaper writers in this case. And the episode is called Death of an Angel. It's the 3rd episode. It's a great series. I do recommend watching it if you are into that sort of thing, which if you're here, you probably are. And so the Limelight. The Limelight was a club in New York City, a very famous, world famous club. Like, I had even heard of the Limelight as a kid. And I was a super sheltered kid. Like, my parents expected me to listen to Disney soundtracks till I was 19, I think. You know, I didn't have those kind of friends. But the club was just that famous. But it wasn't the first club that Peter Gatien had opened. Peter Gatien was a Canadian man in the US, basically had a green card. And his first location that he opened up was in Florida. Like, whatever. He opened it in the 70s, and it was successful until it burned down in the late 70s. He then decided that he was going to move to Atlanta. He opened a location like in a strip mall. I don't know. But he opened his Atlanta location in a strip mall. And it was successful. Like, it was pretty successful. There was some, I couldn't find exactly what the controversy was. I think, honestly, it was just the fact that it was a goddamn nightclub in a strip mall. So, you know, problems are, like, bound to arise from that. But there was celebrity clientele. I pulled up a list of, like, A-list celebrities that were seen in this place. The 3 that stood out to me for some reason were Andy Warhol, Tom Cruise, and Debbie Harry. I don't know why those 3, but I mean, if you look up the list, it was the place to be. So he opened that in 1980, and it was successful, like I said. And for some reason, not really for some reason, in 1983, Peter Gatien wanted more. He wanted more. He liked his Atlanta location. He wanted more, though. So he moved to New York City. Great. You know, New York City, the Big Apple, one of the most, visited cities in the world. And he opened the location in a church. Like, not just it looked like a church, like, it was a church. There was stained glass and pews and altars, even when it was the club. All these things were here. And I had to bring this up because this kills me. So it didn't go straight from being a church to being the Limelight. For like a decade, it was a drug rehab center. Church, drug rehab center, world famous nightclub. And like I said, it was the drug rehab for like a decade. But then he takes it over and he decides he's going to open this club. And he gets it up and running, and it's popular. I mean, it's New York City. Any club in New York City is popular. Like, I'm happy that I can say that I went to the Batcave. When it was the club and not like a traveling night. It wasn't like the Batcave night at whatever. It was the Batcave. Like, I think it's like 3 floors or something. So he gets it up and running, and it's world famous, but it's like a, disco rock place. I don't want to say it was like a dime a dozen, because nothing in New York is a dime a dozen. But it was like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to the club that looks like a church. Cool. So, it starts out like that, whatever. But, and keep in mind, this was open like in the 80s is when he opens this club. Remember, he moves up in 1983. But in the 90s, New York was changing in the 90s. New York was changing in the 90s. New York in the 70s and 80s had kind of a reputation for being like a sleazy place, kind of like there's a lot of, like adult video places, strip clubs, stuff that really there's nothing wrong with, but, a lot of people think that there is something wrong with them, so they protest, they boycott, they try to like shame people for going to these locations. But in the 90s, it was starting to get a little bit more yuppie. So an example that the show used that I really appreciated was the way that New York City was portrayed in the 90s on sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld. It was, like hip young people, new lives in the city, living their dream and everything like that. And that's what a lot of people knew about New York City. But there was still I don't want to say a dark side. There's still the nightlife. Like, the nightlife was not yuppie, like, oh, we're going to wear little black dresses and be cute. And no, it was balls to the wall. And the Limelight turned into like a place where instead of like rock and disco, we started getting into techno and goth industrial music. So for those of you who don't know, I work at a nightclub in Tampa called The Castle. And it is a club that looks like a castle. There's stained glass, there's a tower, and that's the kind of music that we play. We play like goth industrial, not really techno, but you get what I'm saying. So I was always fascinated in both of these places from the get-go. And Peter Gatien is doing really well. And he realizes that there's these kids that are coming out to the club regularly. And we're talking about like wild outfits, outrageous behavior, more outrageous outfits. I mean like outfits, like giant feathers and PVC accessories and all kinds of crazy makeup and everything. And these kids were known as the club kids. And Peter Gatien realized that the antics of these kids were drawing in crowds. They were getting attention. Tourists who came to New York wanted to go to the Limelight. They wanted to see the club kids. They wanted to rub elbows with the club kids and see them in their outfits and see how they acted and all that jazz. Why do I try to do red eyes? I hate doing red eyes. I can never find a good enough red, and I'm trying to not go like super, I don't actually want to do like a club kid look. I want to do something pretty because I have to do some other stuff on some other online stuff. Oh God, why do I try to do red eye? I always try to do it. I always think it's a good idea, even though it never works. The next time I do it, I'm like, oh, I'll do it better. No, this ain't getting any better. Oh God. Anyway, so Peter Gatien brings a couple of these club kids in, and he basically makes a deal with them. You come here, you hang out, you party, you be crazy, and I'll pay you. Sign me up for that job. So you get to these club kids. And also what's happening in between nights at the Limelight is the kids, namely, so the ones who were in charge were Michael Alec, James St. James, Julie Jules, DJ Kioki, and Ernie Glam. They were like the main club kids that kind of started all this, and then they would, so they would throw what are called outlaw parties, which sound fun as hell, but I can't actually say like, hey, you should go do that because they're super illegal. And outlaw parties were parties. One of the main club kids would give you an invite. You had to keep it hush hush though. And, you know, you would word of mouth, and then you would go to this party. But these parties were always held somewhere where you weren't supposed to have a party. So like they'd go into a McDonald's or like a Subway car, or I mean any number of crazy places. And the outlaw parties were literally, they were really just there they were to troll cops. Like there was no illusion that the parties were not going to get broken up. It was literally, we're going to show up, we're going to look amazing. Everybody showed up and had a good time and looked amazing. And then, of course, NYPD would show up and shut the whole thing down. But these parties started getting these club kids notoriety. And the more notorious the club kids were, the more people would go to the Limelight to see them. And of course, the more people there to see them, the more club kids they could bring in. Which, I mean, that sounds like I can't technically condone it, but that sounds like a pretty sound strategy. So, and the thing that gets me about these kids though, and a lot of them are kind of, I don't want to say they're rejects, but a lot of them feel like they didn't really fit in. A lot of them were from like well-to-do families, believe it or not. So these were kids who, I don't know how their home life was, but they had resources, and their families had resources, and they wanted a sense of belonging. So they would hang out with these other club kids, and a lot of them were also members of or friends with the LGBTQIA plus community. And some of the names of the original club kids, besides the 5 that I named, you might actually recognize. And this is where it gets crazy. So the prominent ones that I picked up on the names of were Amanda Lepore, Richie Rich, Jenny Talia, Walt Paper, Astro Earl, RuPaul. RuPaul was a club kid at Limelight. And look where RuPaul is now. Michael Tron was another one. He started going at like 14. So like we all have that friend that was like, oh, I started going to the club at 14. He started going to the club at 14. And then they would, along for the ride, they were friends with writers from local newspapers. Like the Village Voice is a pretty prominent one. That it comes into play later. But Michael Musto, Mr. Musto, was one who, he was primarily a writer, but he would dress up with them. And he would go to the outlaw parties, and he would go to Limelight, and they were all kind of friends. I do have to read this quote though from Michael Musto because I love it. Like, I feel like this sums them up. So he wrote about them as a cult of crazy fashion and petulance, saying that they are terminally superficial, have dubious aesthetic values, and are master manipulators, exploiters, and, thank God, partiers. Like, I've never related to something so much in my life. Like, that's basically my 20s. So I did learn a couple of things in writing this episode. And one of them was that, like, I always got the impression that the club kids were around for like 5 years. And, at best. Like, maybe, like they did it for a couple years and shit went down, and then, and then they were gone. But they were around for quite a while. They were around for almost a decade. Yeah, club kids were around for almost a decade. And it was business as usual. And as the notoriety started building up, they started getting international attention. So like there was an article about them in the New Yorker. They were on daytime talk shows like Geraldo. And like these kids in these small towns would see these club kids and be like, hey man, you know, some poor kid in Kansas sees these, you know, I don't want to say you know what I'm saying, like freaks on TV, and they're like, hey man, like I jive with that. I want to go to New York. I want to be a club kid. You know, I want to live my truth or whatever that they would say. And I mean, we're talking about some of these club kids were basically famous going into all of this. Keep all of this in mind because we're going to take a slight detour in this story. So we're going to rewind to May of 1971 when Andre Angel Melendez was born in Colombia. His family moved from Colombia to New Jersey when he was 8. So in 1979. And he didn't really have a lot of friends. Like by all of the accounts that I've read, he didn't have a lot of friends. But he was very close to his family, loved his family very much, was always close to them. And he became, and this was a new one to me, he became what was referred to as a pier queen. And pier queens were, there were these tough gay youth that would hang out on the piers in the West Village. And a lot of them did drugs, a lot of them sold drugs, and they would kick your ass. Like they would, if you fucked them over, like they would just kick your ass. Like no question. And he goes to the Limelight, right? You know, back forward. He goes to the Limelight and he meets Michael Alec and Peter Gatien. And he makes friends with Michael Alec. Now, I say he makes friends. Really what I mean though is he became known as Michael Alec's drug dealer. Like that was his thing. He was one of the celebrity drug dealers. So he would go to the Limelight, he would bring drugs. And the party themes varied so wildly. But one that stood out to me that the club kids like to talk about are the hospital party, the medical party. I forget what it's called. But basically, it's emergency room party. And you would just be dancing or whatever, and one of the club kids would come up to you with like a fake prescription pad. And you'd be like, oh, let me write you a prescription. So they would write something and you would go find another one of the club kids, you know, like dressed as some sort of medical professional. And you would get free drugs. You would get medication, you would get free drugs. So this is a lot happening. And so the friendships that Angel starts forming with these club kids really are based on the fact that he was a prominent source of drugs. He did have a couple of friends who were true friends, but basically the club kids tolerated him because he had their drugs. And a lot of them didn't even like him. Like he wasn't a super popular dude. But he would always stand out because he wore like these big trademark feathery wings like everywhere. Anytime he went to an owl party or to the Limelight, he was Angel. He was in Angel mode and he was in those wings. And those wings became kind of like symbolic of him. So remember how I was talking about how New York was changing, and it had gone, you know, the reputation had gone from being like this seedy city to, you know, things were looking up. And I was supposed to write down this year, I think it was 1994, Rudy Giuliani was elected mayor of New York City. Good for him, yay. And his platform that he had run on was his quality of life campaign. So, I mean, that sounds great. That sounds like all happy and everything. Really what it was is that Rudy Giuliani decided that all of New York's problems would be solved if he went after a couple of nightclubs that he thought were responsible for basically all of the drugs in New York. Doesn't make any sense, but he literally thought that there were a couple of, like, if he shut down a couple of places, drugs in New York would go away, I guess. I don't know. And a big target was put on the back of Peter Gatien. Because Peter Gatien, he owned Limelight, he owned Tunnel, he owned a couple places. And Giuliani was just convinced that Peter Gatien was why there were drugs. It wasn't even, it really, he was just focused on Gatien. So Giuliani starts hassling them. And Gatien wants to stay open. He likes plausible deniability. He doesn't want for people to think that he's responsible for drugs in his clubs or anywhere else. Because technically somebody else is dealing with the drugs, not him, so it's not. So he makes a decision and he bans Angel from the Limelight. He says, you can't be here anymore because you're here selling drugs. You can't sell drugs, so you can't be here anymore. So this is in March of '96. So Angel shows up anyway. He has to make a living, so he shows up anyway. And of course, Gatien has told security that he can't come in. And so even though he tries to come in, they kick him out. The bouncers kick him out. You know, whatever. I feel like from the get-go, somebody should have been like, because sorry, I can't open this brush. When Angel gets kicked out, the bouncers tear his wings. I couldn't write this any more symbolically. They break his wings. His angel wings, like those are the wings that people look for when they want drugs. That's what, those get broken. And he storms off and no one ever sees him again. The club kids don't see him ever again. Peter Gatien doesn't see him ever again. His family doesn't see him ever again. Gone. Like up in smoke. So, the club kids, remember, they're not really friends with him. A couple of them are friends with him. Most of them are not. A lot of them say that he didn't jive with them. Like, he didn't get it. He wasn't sociable. He wasn't friendly. Not that he wasn't likable. He didn't get it. Like, that's what a lot of accounts that I read and watched said, is that Angel didn't get it. So he disappears. Nobody ever sees him again. And his brother Johnny, of course, remember I said he's close to his family? His brother Johnny starts putting up missing posters all over the place. He's going from precinct to precinct, trying to file missing person reports. The cops are shooting him down because he was a gay Latino drug dealer. He was not a high priority for anyone, which is so sad because, he was a young kid and literally Johnny and the rest of the family were the only people looking for him. Well, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because this is where how did this happen shits. Really, the start of the video was how this shit happen. But, so the club kids see these posters that Johnny is posting for his brother. And most of them thought that it was a prank. because apparently Michael Alec was notorious for being a prankster. Like, he was always pulling jokes on you. Like, you had to have your wits about you because Alec would get you. And while this is all going on, remember how I said that some of the club kids were friends with some local columnists? So 2 articles are written about the story. One is a blind bit where Michael Musso's big, well, the story says that, Mr. Drug Dealer and Mr. Addict or whatever, and so we were kind of like a what if, whereas the other article was flat out, Michael Alec did this. He did this, and so the story that was going around, everyone had their own theory. Like, this was a mess to try to figure out, like, who said what. Basically, so Michael Alec had a roommate named Robert Freeze Riggs, and they were good friends. I believe Freeze was also a drug dealer, but the implication of the one article and the accusation of the other is that Alec and Freeze killed Angel over drugs. And so these articles get a lot of attention thrown on the Limelight and Peter Gatien. And remember, Peter Gatien had Angel bounced to avoid this. He doesn't want the wrath of Giuliani coming down on him and shutting down his clubs. So, these articles hit, and he's got this negative attention. Like, the whole, there's, no publicity is negative. Not true in this case. So he has a decision to make, and he fires Michael Alec. So Michael Alec's fired, and we have these articles floating around, these news and the Village Voice and stuff like that. And the police are interested because they have a dismembered body in a box. They have stories that Michael Alec is going around telling everyone that he murdered Angel. So we have all this stuff happening. And then really what kicks this all up into overdrive is in, I think it's November of 96, another body washes up. Washes up. Similar condition to the first body. Which, okay, cool. So the police are like, okay, we have a body that was found around the time that this kid went missing. There's this other kid saying he killed that kid. They start asking the club kids questions. And of course, the club kids are like, hey man, we don't know what's going on. All we know is Michael said that he did this and everything. Michael's been acting weird. Michael got fired. And so the cops start putting together all this information. And when the second body washes up, they use dental records to identify the first body as Angel. The second body is unrelated, but they don't know that. All I know is they had 2 bodies and then rumors and everything. So they identify Angel using dental records. And so now we know that it's him. And during the course of all this, the DEA was trying to go after Peter Gatien. They were going for, basically they thought he was some big drug kingpin. They were going after him, and they wanted Michael Alec to testify against him. Now, in order for Michael Alec to testify against him, he can't be in jail or anything like that. He has to be they have to be able to paint him as a reputable witness, which is fucking ridiculous. He literally lied about everything for no reason. Like, he would just, why would you, I wouldn't believe him. I don't, like, so when the cops want to question him, they get pushed back because they want Peter Gatien more than they care about Riggs or Alec. So, and of course, this whole time they don't care about getting justice for Angel, because Angel is just some fucking gay Latino drug dealer. You know, that doesn't, what does that get them? You know, which is so sad and such bullshit. And I could talk about that for another half an hour. But the identification of Angel's body had ripple effects. So they go to the club kids and they start asking the club kids questions. And a whole bunch of, they get all the information out and they figure out kind of what's happening. And they, so they let it be known that they're going after Michael Alec. And he flees to a hotel in New Jersey with I believe his boyfriend. I think he was there with his boyfriend. And the cops are afraid that he's going to flee and they're never going to find him again. So they show up at the hotel. They knock on the door. And he answers the door. And he's stoned out of his gourd. He's so high he can barely stand. He's playing with like a child's farm playset, which is such a random fact that the one cop remembered. But yeah, he was playing with like the little toddler, the little people with like a head and a body and like the big round animals. He was playing with that. And he was, like I said, he was so high he could barely stand up. And you gotta think about somebody who's done this many drugs for this long. He was so high he could barely stand up. That's a lot of drugs. Anyway, so that was on December 5th, 1996. And they go find him, and when they arrest him, they go racing after Robert Freeze Riggs. They're still, unfortunately, though, dealing with pushback because the DEA wants Gatien. They are willing to bite the bullet that Alec might have killed a man and cut him up and dumped his body. They want Gatien. And the local cops were like, no, we're not going to let you do that. We're going after this guy. We're going to press charges. We're going to go after this. So they go and they get Riggs. And when they find Riggs, it's like a totally different experience than when they find Alec. So Robert Freeze Riggs basically is like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I cannot. It needs to be over. And this is about to get real graphic. This description of events is based on like evidence that they found on the body and the statements of Michael Alec and Freeze Riggs. And this, I have it on my notes because this is just fucking, and some of the details are oddly, so like I said, Michael Alec and Freeze Riggs lived together. They were roommates. I'm pretty sure Freeze Riggs was also a drug dealer, but Angel was Michael Alec's main drug dealer. And so Angel gets bounced from the Limelight because of drugs. And remember his wings get torn and he's mad. So he goes to Alec's apartment to confront him. Apparently Alec had stolen some drugs from him. And the argument was about the stolen drugs and, like Alec needed to pay him or something like that. And it got a little confrontational and it got a little aggressive. It got violent. So, Angel and Alec are duking it out. And Angel actually gets the upper hand on Alec and gets him pinned down. But of course, Alec's buddy Freeze is right there. And Riggs grabs a hammer that was out for some reason. He grabs a hammer and he hits Angel over the head 3 times. And gets him down, like down on the floor. And Michael Alec, and this was apparently, so there's 2 different versions. One version is that Alec grabbed a pillow and suffocated him. The other one is that he grabbed a sweater. But I believe Rick's statement more than I believe Alec's. And Freeze says that he grabbed a pillow and proceeded to suffocate Angel with it. And then, so they get Angel out. They kill him. And so they have this body in this apartment. And they strip him down. And they put him in the bathtub. And Michael Alec pours Drano down his throat. And like tapes his mouth closed. And then pours baking soda all over the body. And they just leave it in the tub. And they leave it in the tub and they go on this massive drug bender. And this body is in this bathtub for a week. And they have people over to the apartment. People are like, hey, what's that smell? Like, is something wrong? Like, your apartment smells. Clean your apartment. And the club kids are all like, oh, he's just got a dirty apartment. So when the week is up, Riggs goes to Macy's and he buys 3 knives. And he doesn't really have the stomach to be part of the dismemberment. So he gives Alec 10 bags of heroin to cut off Angel's legs so that they can get rid of the body. And they put the legs in separate garbage bags and then put the garbage bags inside duffel bags. They put all of it in the box. They get in a cab. Like, they walk out to the street and get a cab and get in this fucking cab with this rotting body and go throw it in the river. So this is pretty disgusting. So this is, I can understand if they were high and then they had the confrontation and then they accidentally killed him and then they went to the police. No. They let the body sit in a tub for a week and rot. And then cut him up and threw him in a river. And Alex says that the cab driver helped them. Rick says no, the cab driver didn't help them. I don't know if Alec thought that the cab driver helping them sounded cooler. There's no logic when it comes to Michael Alec. They wound up getting prosecuted despite anything that anyone wanted to go after irrigation for. So they were both dropped as witnesses, but they were still given plea deals. For manslaughter in the first degree, they were sentenced to 10 to 20 years. And this is October, I think, of 1997. And as this is all going down, like Limelight did not get shut down. Gation's case got thrown out. But the club kids weren't happening anymore. Like it just wasn't cool anymore to be like this, high as fuck club kid. It just wasn't cool anymore because the only association with the club kids was now this horrible, horrible murder. And of course, when you hear it now, like, yeah, you hear it now and you're like, how the fuck? First of all, how did nobody figure out that there was a rotting body in that bathroom? Like, they just walked into his apartment and thought it was smelly. And just the whole thing was and he was walking around telling people he killed Angel, and everyone's just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, none of that. I'm sorry, there's just so much, how the fuck did this happen? But it gets worse. So Riggs was released on parole in 2010. So 1997 to 2010. 13 years. 13 years. And then Michael Alec was released in 2014. So that was 17 years. And the Gation's initial case got thrown out. But so the Limelight does not get shut down from all of this. Peter Gation does, however, get convicted of tax evasion in 99. He pleads guilty. And he gets deported to Canada, because if you're in the country on a green card and you commit a felony, you get deported. So he gets schlepped back to Canada. And he's a native Canadian, so he can come to the US. It's not like he's banned from the US. He just can't live here. And so from what I understand, he doesn't visit frequently, but he visits. Michael Alec, my favorite person, was arrested in 2017 because he was in a park after hours doing meth. Got arrested for trespassing and meth use. And I was seeing he pled guilty for release, for like conditional release or something like that. I don't know what the conditional release is. I'm assuming it's like, hey, guess what? We'll let you go, but don't fuck up again. I'm assuming is what that means. Of course, Christmas Day of 2020, he died of a heroin overdose, which is horrifically sad. I was not surprised when I found out the news, but I did find out the news, oddly enough, from I follow some of the club kids on Instagram and other feeds. One of them is Wallpaper. He made kind of definitely a post with mixed emotions, talking about like he hopes that Michael Alec finds the peace that he denied himself in life or something like that. It was really sad because I feel like that's kind of the spirit of a lot of this. When I talk to people about the club kids, they're like, oh, like Party Monster. And I get that's, you know, how a lot of people learn about it, but it drives me batty when people can tell me all about Party Monster, which to me is like a glamorization of like a really terrible situation. So when they want to talk to me about Party Monster, but they can't tell me even Angel, like I'm not expecting you to know his name is Andre, but if you can't talk about Angel Melendez, I don't talk about the situation at all. Michael Alec, I think, is a piss poor representation of what the club kids have become since all of this. A lot of them are very active in the LGBT community. They're vocal activists who support the Black Lives Matter movement. When it comes down to it, Angel Melendez was a 25-year-old kid who moved from Colombia with his family. Yeah, he was dealing drugs. He shouldn't have been dealing drugs, but dealing drugs shouldn't end like this at all. And I was reading that he apparently wanted to, at some point in his life, open a shelter in New York and New Jersey for gay youth. And I just think that's, I don't know, that's maybe what we should take away from all this situation, and not the doom and gloom of Michael Alec, who is a monster who didn't face nearly enough consequences for anything that he did ever. So I don't have anything to add to this, unfortunately. Like, that's just, it is what it is, and it's terrible. Let me, like I said, I lost my list with all of my ideas. So if there's something that you want to know, I want to know what you want to know. So leave me a comment. I'll post all my social stuff. Try to hide my dirty clothes hamper that I forgot was there. So I'll put all my info here. We'll do Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook is going to go here somewhere. I hope that you guys are happy to see me back. I'm happy to be back. And I'm looking forward to making videos in the new situation now. Have a great day. I hope you rock it. And I will see you when I see you.